As I've been reading the Bible chapter by chapter on my YouTube, I've just been discovering stuff, and I'll post a video. Recently, I did one. One's kind of funny. It's like God puts a curse on people, and He gives them hemorrhoids. He gives them hemorrhoids. Oh, the Ark of the Covenant. The Philistines actually got their hands on the Ark of the Covenant, and so it became a curse to them. Anybody who like possessed it, they were dying and stuff. And God actually put a curse on the Philistines when they got the Ark because they defeated um, they were defeating Israel, and so when they retreated, they got their hands on the covenant, and God put a curse on them, and He gave them hemorrhoids. It's pretty interesting. It's kind of funny. They started dying. They're like, we need to give this back. So they just like left it somewhere in one part of the land of Israel, like on the border between Philistines and Israel, I guess. Anyway, so this is not part of that video. I just actually just right now I got a profound idea, and but let me talk about the original idea. What I learned about David. So right now I'm on the First Samuel, and so the same thing David does. One of his greatest sins is when he's the king. He sees this beautiful woman cleaning herself, taking up bathing herself, and he loves her. He's like, she needs to be mine. Like he falls on. He just thinks she's just amazingly beautiful. And this is the king. He already has multiple concubines and multiple wives, but he chooses her and he sleeps with her and she gets pregnant. I'm not that part yet, but I do remember that part. You know, it's one of David's major stories, one of his major hiccups, one of his greatest sins that he's always constantly like pleading to God for forgiveness about. And I mean, people have told me that. I'm gonna actually come to that idea myself, and I'll talk about it later. But when Saul's army of Israel, because they asked for a king, they wanted a king. They were asking for a king from the prophet Samuel, but Samuel was like, the people goes to God. The people want a king, God. The people want a king, and God's like, and then like God's pretty much telling Samuel, well, I'm enough. They don't need a king. He's like, but they want a king. I'm gonna give them one. It's not gonna be the one they want though. And so Samuel goes to them, but aren't you guys you guys should be, because he says this a little bit, it's kind of vague a little bit. Samuel responds to the people like, God's gonna give you a king, but not the one you want. He'll grant you a king, but then it's not gonna be the one you want again. And um, it's not gonna be the one you want. Samuel, God's gonna give you a king, but it's not gonna be the one you want. And like, shouldn't you be proud? Like, I'm not proud. You should be like God's the only king you need. You know, this is during Judges, the book of Judges. There's not really no person standing out. There's like Caleb, and you got Rebecca. You got these people and judges that come up and free the people from slavery because they're getting defeated and being put into bondage and stuff. And so you got these judges. They're called judges who come and tell what, because of your sin, because of your sin, because of your sin. But I'm gonna help you, and like to become like leaders of the army and help them. You know, I'm sure there's other people involved, but these are the people who stood out in the Bible, I guess. The commanders and generals, I guess, of Israel armies, or people who are wise and like prime ministers. And so David, his greatest sin, he takes the woman, he sleeps with her, gets her pregnant, but she's actually married, and she's married to one of his soldiers. So he comes up with an idea, like he's trying to hide his sin. He comes up with an idea. Well, let me go call that soldier back from war, because the soldier's actually away at war. Let me call him back from war so he could sleep with his wife, which is weird. It's like, how can that really be? Like, how can he know she's pregnant? I guess her period stopped, and before her belly was showing. You know, I'm pretty sure that was a way for them to find out. And so he's like, let me call him back so he could be at home. And obviously he's gonna have sex with his wife. And he's gonna think he's the father. But his warrior is so loyal to Israel. He's like, no, all my men are fighting. I need to be fighting with them. So he's like, you know what? Then he's so stubborn. I'm gonna put him in the front line so he could die, because I don't want people to find out what I did. So he does that, and the man dies, and God puts a curse on that first baby, and I think she loses that first baby. But then he gets her pregnant again, and from that same woman, he created his greatest sin. He creates his son, who takes over. He becomes his heir, and he's known as one of the most in the Bible, one of the most wisest and knowledgeable men. and he becomes the king, obviously after his father. Which it could be some nepotism there, right? You don't really know, but he does. Well, one of my favorite books in the Bible is called Ecclesiastes, and King Solomon is actually the author of that book. Well, they give him credit for being the author of that book, and it's it's like we'll get there. I'll talk about it later. So it's interesting because Saul and Israel go up against the Philistines, but they're afraid of them. They're formidable, right? And then all of a sudden, this big, huge, one of their big, huge soldiers comes because they're pretty much at a standoff where one's right here, Philistines are right here, like on this hill, and then Israel's on this hill, and there's a valley in between, and they're just looking at each other, not knowing what to do. All of a sudden, this guy named Goliath comes, a big monster, says, "Who's gonna fight me?" And everybody's kind of scared, but then David's not scared. This boy. What happens is that David's brothers are at war with Israel against the Philistines. And so David's dad, Jesse, because David's the youngest son, he's always out in the field. He's like a sheep herder, always protecting the sheep as the brothers are out to war. But so the dad gives food and some stuff, I guess the brothers would need. And sends David off to go give them this stuff. And as David's there, he's like just watching what's going on. And I think even the brothers get upset, like, "What are you doing watching?" And then Goliath is kind of taunting them, like nobody could defeat me. He's almost like a giant sort of character. And then David says, like, I could defeat him. You know, I'm always protecting the sheep from wolves and what did he say, bears? I think maybe even bears or something. This might not even be true. There's bears over there. I don't even know. I think it's lions and something. I can't remember. And I don't even know. Who knows? Even I don't want to get caught up in some contradictions right here, but the story's just good, right? So David kills him with a slingshot. And I've seen people on YouTube use slingshots in a certain way where it's pretty powerful. The velocity and force you could throw a rock at using some sort of sling, it could kill somebody for sure. So David, the young man, kills him, cuts his head off, and he frees Israel. So he's getting known. He's getting known as this valiant general with a lot of influence. People love him because what he did, he pretty much defeated the Philistines for Israel. And I remember this part where there's like ladies who come and they're happy that Israel's free from the power of the Philistines. They're defeating them. They have confidence and they're winning the war. And they're like, because Saul is the king at the time. He's like, Saul kills thousands, David kills 10,000. So Saul's becoming jealous, and it's called like an evil spirit. Like God put an evil spirit over Saul, which I'm crediting to like jealousy and a hatred. And so anyway, but then Saul has a son named Jonathan, and Jonathan's kind of like he's just kind of like a cool kid, I would say, just like a cool guy. So he ends up really loving David. He sees him as a brother. But David's living with Saul, and Saul's having these jealous things, and David's younger, probably doesn't realize it. But then he's getting so jealous that the way it's written in the Bible, that he's like in his room, and he has his javelin in his hand, and he just overwhelming feeling where he just feels like he has to attack David. One time he tries to attack him, he misses David. The second time, David actually sees he's about to attack him, and he like gets out of the way quick, and he runs away. And then so he actually runs away back to where Samuel is at, the prophet Samuel. He tells him what's going on, but Samuel's prophesying, and like the power of prophecy is like over the people where Samuel's like wherever Samuel's at in the little town. I guess in that church there's like prophecy going on. So David or Saul goes and looks for David, and Samuel's like, "What's going on, Saul? Why are you here?" And Saul gets caught up in that power of prophecy too, which keeps him kind of stabilized so David could get away. And then Jonathan goes and sees David. He's like, "Hey, dude, there's like this feast of the new moon. It's called the Feast of the New Moon. Like, you're expected there." He's like, "I can't go. Your dad wants to kill me." He's like, "My dad doesn't want to kill you. My dad, if he ever did something so crazy like that, my dad would let me know." He said, "No." David tells him, "Well, your dad knows how you have love for me. He knows you'll get upset and sad, so he doesn't want to tell you." He's like, "This is what's gonna happen. I'm gonna go hide in the woods. When the feast of new moon comes, your dad's gonna see me missing. And if he sees me missing more than one, like it's like a feast for 3 days. If your dad sees me missing, your dad's gonna ask where I finally been. And depending on your dad's reaction, this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna shoot 3 arrows, and you're gonna have your like one of your, I guess, like a sport or like, or well, I guess like people who could afford it, they'll go shoot arrows, and one of their little lads, they call it it's English, so lad would go fetch the arrows and bring them back. He's like if you have your lad go and fetch the arrows and bring them back, then it's a sign that, unfortunately, your dad doesn't want to kill me. And so Jonathan is like, okay, well, we need to make a covenant. I have love for you. Just know, because Jonathan knows that David must have like a bigger purpose. So he's like being friends. Like he makes a covenant, a promise. He makes David promise. So like, no matter what happens, we're always gonna be friends, and you're gonna have love for me. When you get to a place, you're gonna look out for me and my seed and your seed forever. Or we're gonna have a covenant. We're gonna have a friendship forever. And so they have like a sad moment. But it just like what was profound was that idea that, okay, because before this, right? I went to the end, but in between all that, when David was having jealousy over David, when Saul was having jealousy over David, Saul was like, okay, let me have him marry one of my daughters. I don't know why. Maybe I think he was trying to set him up or something. Like, I don't know, have one of his daughters. And then, but the other daughter married somebody else, and then there was another daughter I think David liked. He's like, okay, I want you to marry my daughter. But he's like, I don't have a dowry. Like, I don't have money for her. Like, there's no inheritance coming. He's like, I don't need you to have a dowry. I just, you know what you can do for me? You could just defeat the Philistines. Like, use your power of, because he was hoping David would die in the war, but David never died. And like the same thing that happened to David as like a younger man when he was first coming into power, he would do later on, right? Like Saul trying to trick him into marrying his daughter and just go to war and defeat the Philistines, hoping that he would die. It's the same thing Saul does later when he impregnates who would later be Solomon's mother. Like he would do to her husband, like go to the front line. Okay, just go to the front line. You really want to serve us and love us, was only in order that he could hide his secret sin, but he couldn't hide it from God, obviously, right? And so it's just almost. And then okay, anyway, later on, I don't know. There's another fascinating part is when the second day that Saul realizes David is not there at the feast of the new moon, he tells his son, "Well, where's David at?" He said, "Hey, well, David said that he needs to go back to his hometown because his brother called him there. He needs to do something there." And he said, and then Saul blows up and gets mad and tells Jonathan, "You fool! Don't you know that I know you have love for David, but don't you know that as long as David is alive, you're not going to inherit the kingdom because David is look at David has all this love in our country or whatever, or has all this love in our kingdom. People want him to be king." And Jonathan's like, "Oh yeah," he's like, I need to, or so Saul goes, he tells David, Saul tells Jonathan, "I need to go and find David and he needs to die." That's when Jonathan realizes like David was right. My dad wants to kill David. And that's when he did the little thing, the little sign that showed, what's the sign that showed David that, because David was watching from the field and David was like, "Oh yeah, so the sign is true." Like, oh no, Jonathan does know my dad. I mean, Jonathan does know that Saul wants to kill me. So they have like this final at the end of chapter 1 Samuel 20. They have this little like hug and farewell. It's kind of sad. Like, but he says, "Remember our covenant, David. Remember. Like, I have love for you. Like, forgive me for what my dad, like, but just know that our friendship is still here. We're still brothers. Still have a brotherhood." And it was I don't know, it's a very interesting story. But just that, like, how the same thing David would do later on actually happened to him when Saul wanted him. "Oh no, you don't need a dowry. You can marry, dude, all you've done, you defeated the Philistines for us. Like, just keep defeating them. That's the only thing you have to do, and you can marry my daughter. You don't need to have some inheritance or be rich or nothing." Like, just because in secret he wanted David to die, and David actually did that later on, which is just like, oh my, it was like, whoa. And then another thing is that as I'm reading this Bible, maybe the practical element it has in it, and it's practical in a sense, and now that I'm older, is that because right now, as I just finished reading that, like Saul's still alive. David had to flee. Jonathan knows. Jonathan's like, go, David. Like now I know that my dad wants to kill you. My dad just told me this, and I'm thinking because as I'm reading right here, like a lot of bad stuff ends up happening to people. These disobedient people, right? Because I'm trying to wonder, like, I could just see something bad gonna come to Saul. Like Saul's end is gonna be bad. Like Saul's gonna die in a fucked up way, right? So this book is showing me like you see behavior and you know the outcome. That's the practical thing about this book. that you don't really get if you're just like maybe going to it because you're nervous or scared, or if you're reading it younger, you're reading it, or you maybe, or you're not as wise reading it. But now that, and maybe you're not reading it in this sense, like chapter by chapter as a book. Some people say, don't read it. Bible's not meant to be read as a book. What? What do you mean it's not meant to be read as a book? This is a book. We read it from beginning to the end, sir. That's how books are. And so I heard that from some silly guy, and he's just getting notoriety because he's like this gangbanger, who like doesn't gangbang anymore, but he like, I guess, came out clean, clean record, like didn't do nobody dirty, just didn't die. He didn't commit. He's not in prison for life, right? You just could think he has like people could listen to him. He's kind of off a little bit. He's off in his historical, like he tries. I don't know. I think he's off. He's like thinks the Earth is flat, and so that means if the Earth's flat, there's an end point. You could, you know, I don't know. I think he's tripping, but anyway, so that was profound. Like David would do the same thing later on, and he would actually do that. Like he would actually like that guy who he slept with his wife. That poor fellow would actually end up dying. I found that profound. But also profound found profound. Also found it profound is that like you see here the behavior of somebody and then the outcome. I think that's very important to recognize when you're reading this book. Peace.